Good evening, everyone. All right, let's try one more time. Good evening, everyone. All right, thank you. I'm from a Baptist tradition, so if I speak and you don't speak back, sometimes I wonder if I'm being viewed as opposed to being seen. So thank you for that interaction. First, I want to welcome you on behalf of the Fifth Circuit Solicitor's Office to today's community forum. As many of you are aware, I told you about 6 months ago that we were going to do from time to time community forum where we talked about some of the issues that are near and dear to the communities in the Fifth Circuit, which is Richland and Kershaw counties. And right now we are seeing, as many would say, a spike in violence as it relates to gun violence, as it relates to violent crime, and its effects on juveniles and juvenile crime. So it's important today for us to convene and to have conversations so that we can get a better understanding of what some of the issues really are, as opposed to some of the outside noise. We can learn about what some of these issues are, where the policymakers, meaning our representatives, stand, where our law enforcement leaders stand, where our community leaders stand, where our office stands, so that we can have a common understanding, and then not just stop with that understanding, but move to action plans, move towards next steps, so that we can all grow our communities and put them in a better place, or leave them in a better place than when we started to be there. Ultimately, we want our communities to be better for our children than they were for us. And we want a safer community for our children than we have presently. And so by having these conversations and these calls to action and the understanding what all of the issues are, we put ourselves in a position to do better by our children and by our families. So that's the impetus behind having these community sessions. What I'll tell you is that I named it the point, no justice, no peace, meaning KNOW justice, KNOW peace. And the point came from a pastor who was a pastor here for a long time, Dr. Latta R. Thomas. Some of you may know who he is. Used to be pastor of Second Calvary Baptist Church. And one thing in the sermon that he said that I can remember very well when I was a kid is that sometimes when you're in a heated argument or discussion, you have a tendency, or we have a tendency, to point the finger and say, you didn't do that, you didn't do that, you need to do this better. And while that may be true, when you point the finger at somebody, there are three that come back at you. So in my position, if I point my finger and I say, Sheriff, you should do this better, or Chief Holbrook, you should do this better, or Representatives, you should do this better, what about the three that are pointing at me to tell me the things that my office needs to do better? Or is communities say, all right, well, you need to do these things better. Well, in our communities, what can we in our communities do better as well? Or if law enforcement says, hey, well, you guys, representatives, need to do better, or representatives say that, well, what can you do better? So again, what we're trying to do is to stop the rock throwing, stop the trash talking, stop the trolling, and to do something positive by having real conversations so that we can make real changes that will take effect and have a real difference in our future. So what I'll say in preface before I hand the mic off to Mr. Clairvaux, Friendly Clairvaux, who will be moderating today, is it's not going to be a rock throwing session. We're asking that if you have questions that you write them down. They'll just raise your hand if you have a question. You'll be able to write that down. One of us will collect those questions, and those questions will be asked. And as you ask those questions, as those questions are asked, we do have a format that we'll talk about a few things that we feel are important as it relates to violence, as it relates to gun violence and juveniles. But we'll work to get those questions in as well. And as we ask those questions and float those things out there, we're always looking for what are our next steps. So as we wrap up, we'll talk about next steps, legislation, and things of that nature, so that we can truly make the difference, as opposed to just talking about it. We can actually be about it. So again, if you'll silence your phones, if you will just respect the rules, write those questions down, and we'll ask those questions, and we'll start this this community forum so that we can start to get questions, answers, and conversation going, and we can have the conversations that need to be had. So now I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Clairvaux, Friendly Clairvaux, who will be moderating today.
Thank you so much, Solicitor. We appreciate it. Everybody, we want to thank you all for coming out tonight. Just so you all know that this will end, we will have a abrupt stop at 7:30. So at about 7:15 or 7:20, we will start having final closing remarks and statements. So just want to let everybody know. So if I have to shut it down, that you're not offended, because we need to be aware of people's timing. Folks have to go to work, kids have to go to school. So just so you know that, okay? So as we begin, once again, Freddie Clairvaux from Watch Fox News. I want to thank you all again for taking part. Now, our panelists, we have here Chief Skip Holbrook from Columbia Police Department. We have Sheriff Leon Lott with the Richland County Sheriff's Department. Wendy Brawley, South Carolina State House Representative. Jermaine Johnson, South Carolina State House Representative as well. We also have Brian Main from the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. And we will also have joining us Eden Hendrick, the Acting Director for DJJ as well. And we will also have a local pastor as well. Once they are able to be here, we'll make sure that they are seated. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'll get started with this for law enforcement, and even anyone can jump in with this. SLED just recently released some new numbers on Monday. Talked about in 2020, the murder rate in South Carolina jumped 22%, and aggravated assaults were more than 10%. So from the law enforcement standpoint, kind of help us understand some of these statistics.
Good evening. Solicitor Gibson, thank you for putting this important forum together. Those numbers are sobering. I think that what the sheriff and myself have often talked about, we've experienced some historic levels of violent crime. We've also experienced, really a decade of violent crime levels that are certainly unacceptable. One of the things that I often speak of now is we have instituted and deployed some significant technology. We've invested in technology, and where we are seeing these trends really skyrocket nationally and throughout our state, which is indicated in these numbers. We're making some progress at the local level. I think one of the things that has troubled us, and I think it's what we're going to talk a little bit more about tonight, is what we refer to as our non-fatal hits. When someone is hit by gunfire, and then there is a retaliatory shooting as a result of that. And that touches everybody in this room, whether it's solicitor's office, law enforcement, community, families, our criminal justice system. So I think that's going to probably drive our conversation, but I don't think we can ignore that this is not just a neighborhood or community issue now. This is a city issue, a county issue, and a state issue.
As law enforcement agents, can you all talk about locally here in Richland County how these numbers affect us?
Well, they're not numbers, they're people. They're somebody's son or daughter that's been murdered. Somebody's son or daughter that's going to be spending a lot of time in prison because they committed the murder. So, it's hard when you say they're stats or they're numbers, they're people. And we can't forget that. And I think if we focus that they are people and not just a number, I think I'll bring it home to reality a little bit. And it is, it's a nationwide problem. I talked to sheriffs from across the nation, and they all say the same thing. That's the violent crime problem across this nation. So we're not immune to it, and we're not anything different than anybody else either. So as they're seeing spikes in other cities, we're seeing it in Richland County and the city of Columbia also. But as Chief Holbrook said, we've watched it steadily climb. We've been talking about it for years, and it fell on deaf ears. A lot of people didn't want to hear it, didn't want to say that we had a crime problem. And it's that 14 to 24-year-old age group that we're seeing most of them committing the crimes or being the victims of the crime. And it all centers around guns. Guns bring respect. Guns bring power. Guns will also take you to the cemetery or to prison too. And our kids are not hearing that. So it is a violent crime problem that we've got in our community. And it is a community problem. It is not a law enforcement problem. It is a community problem.
And with that being said, Sheriff, either you or Chief, we're saying on that notion here, you mentioned the 14 to the 20 age bracket. There are so many programs out there. There are mentoring programs. There are things that are out there. Why do you think this is happening in that age bracket?
parents that are not being parents. They're just being adults in the house with kids, not taking responsibility for their kids. 13 or 14-year-old to be out at 3 o'clock in the morning during the week, going into cars and stealing guns. Where's the parents' accountability? We're lacking that. And that's what we've seen over the last years, is that our parents are not stepping up and being parents, and they're not being held accountable for what these kids are doing. And they're allowing kids to go out and commit crimes. They don't care. So that is a big problem that we've got when it comes to what's not happening at home.
I agree. And I would also add that the availability of firearms and how easily accessible they are. We have young adults that, people that are a lot smarter than me often talk about the development of the brain and the maturity level. And with a lot of these young adults, they're making very emotional decisions that, once upon a time, maybe back as I was a young adult, an incident that would result in a shoving match or, some stern argument, some words, somebody pulls a gun, somebody else pulls a gun, and, somebody discharges a firearm and may even hit an unintended target. We not only do we have a ridiculous amount of people hit by gunfire, the property damage that we see when no one's hit, but property damage is quite alarming. I showed some video today in a media event where we were discussing crime and some technology, but it looked like something you'd see in a movie. And these were just, clips of our surveillance videos throughout the city that have picked up, serious gunfire, people shooting at each other. And it's just unacceptable.
Brian Main with ATF, you're here. You deal a lot with gunfire. A lot of weapons. Can you talk to how these weapons are getting into the streets? What are you all finding?
Yes. First of all, thank you, Mr. Solicitor, for inviting us here today on behalf of the Charlotte Field Division. We appreciate the opportunity to talk to everybody. So we're seeing the same trends nationally as we are here locally. The biggest way that guns are getting into our communities are from theft. The bottom line is guns are being stolen from homes, from cars. In some cases, they're being stolen from their own relatives. That would be the most prominent way that firearms end up in the streets. The second most prominent way is through what we call straw purchasers, and that's when someone who is lawfully able to go into a gun store to purchase a firearm does so and comes out and gives that firearm to someone who's prohibited from purchasing that firearm. We have ways of tracking this. We have, through crime gun intelligence, through firearm tracing and other methods. We do identify who those purchasers are when guns are recovered in crimes, and we're able to address that. But that's sort of the beginning of gun trafficking. When you think of gun trafficking, and so often, this one failing. Is that better? Yes. When you think of gun trafficking, you see in the movies, you see these truckloads of firearms being shipped across state lines, and really, gun trafficking for us is when a firearm moves from illegal to an illegal market, and that could be right here in our community. It moves from a legal market at a lawful gun store into an illegal market with a purchase. And while there's a lot of talk about gun trafficking nationally, I can tell you that almost entirely all of the guns that are recovered here in South Carolina were purchased here. And we are a source state for other states, especially northern states. But even in those states, typically those firearms are purchased closely within the community, and they stay close to the community that they're bought in.
To the lawmakers who are here, we're adding guns to the equation. Is there any type of legislation or anything that might be in the works to combat or maybe deal with this issue of straw purchasing, he mentioned, and gun trafficking?
First, thank you so much, Mr. Solicitor, for having us. I'm delighted to be on the panel, and to all the folks who've come out tonight, thank you for being here. At one point in time at the State House, I was the gun lady because I was constantly trying to introduce legislation to curtail the availability of guns. Please don't think that I'm against the Second Amendment, because I am not. but owning a gun is a responsibility. And it really requires proper training. It requires proper registration. And if that gun is stolen, it should require proper reporting of that stolen gun. Really, we are lax in all three of those areas in South Carolina. And the only way that that's going to change is that we create and pass legislation. It would be nice if people would do the right thing on their own, but this is the real world, and we have to have some guidelines. Unfortunately, what we're seeing at the state capitol are gun laws actually being relaxed. They passed an open carry law in South Carolina. I don't know if you all are aware of it, but it means that, you used to have a CWP, concealed weapon permit, to lawfully own a gun. And you still do right now, but you can carry those guns openly. And we're a touristic city, state, and I just don't understand how we can pass laws that put more guns on the street. But this is the legislative environment that we are in, because there is a strong belief that